Hi. Back in 2017, Google's VR team produced a couple of creator tools. One was Tilt Brush, and the other was Google Blocks. And I jumped on the opportunity to play around with Google Blocks, and I created a whole lot of various assets which lived on their poly.com service where you could check out the things that were created. And in December of 2020, Google announced that they were going to be shutting down Google Poly. And I thought, you know, uh, now the pieces that I created, even though they're silly little sketches, have no home. So over the weekend, I decided to build an exhibit that showcased some of the things that were built in Google Blocks. These were really just me playing around to see what was possible in VR. And so I thought I'd give you a little walking tour of this exhibit that showcases a lot of the little miscellaneous things I built over a span of a couple years. One of the things worth mentioning is that in Google Blocks, it's rather ingenious, but one of the limitations is you only have a few colors to work with. So in this exhibit, everything is using just these colors and one transparency. So this first room is some of the objects I created, and one of the things I wanted to keep in mind was appeal. Something that was a part of working at Disney was that every object needed to have some sense of charm or approachability in its shapes. The other thing too is that these objects could tell a story. So who owned the object, and and was the object being used recently? So in the case of this steamer trunk, who potentially owned it? Have they just arrived? Is it male? Is it female? My guess is probably it's female by the shoes, and maybe it's after a party because there's some champagne glasses. Or over here, these suitcases, is someone leaving on a trip, or have they just arrived? Or maybe even over here, this spyglass, is it looking at the stars? And are they ready for a night of stargazing? They've got a book here and maybe some hot chocolate or some coffee. Over here, this gramophone where they've going through records trying to decide what to play next. I also played around with food, you know, creating items that were edible, but also creating whatever props are necessary to tell the story about them. So there's donuts because donuts, and these are the fancy donuts, not the just run of the mill donuts. And there's a cup of coffee. Over here, high tea, where you can choose between cucumber sandwiches or clotted cream on your scones. Also, I built a wedding cake, but rather than just a wedding cake, I wanted it to feel like it was being interacted with. So there's actually a slice of cake that's here on the side. So whatever the objects are, it's an opportunity to tell a little bit of a story. So what does one expect when they see a grouping of objects, and what the activity might be surrounding those objects? Over here in this room, I just have some miscellaneous items. I did some vending machines. These were easy because they were something I could do in an hour or two just playing around. So this is a sort of beverage machine that you might see in Korea or Japan, very brightly colored. Or over here, here's a fortune telling machine, or even this little popcorn wagon, or this Punch and Judy stage. And then in this direction, I've got sort of vignettes that suggest that something's happening or just happened. And, you know, I work in my studio, but my second home, at least before COVID hit, was a local cafe where I would bring just enough stuff, my message bag and a sketchbook and a laptop, and sit down and have a coffee and work there for a few hours. And a little bonsai here with a little bonsai trimming scissors. Or over here, this is my traveling watercolor set that I take with me when I am out in the world and want to do some watercolors. And back here is Baba Yaga's house. I can't remember whether or not the sketch came first or the model came first, but either way, it was a way in which I could feel what it might be like to visit Baba Yaga's house. Over in this area, one of the things that really surprised me about working in VR, before I started building things, I just assumed that working in VR would be kind of like working in a virtual workshop. You would have a workbench and then you would build stuff on the virtual workbench. But what I hadn't realized that in VR, everything is relative size wise. So if I wanted to do a matchbook, I could build it the size of a car. And then once I'm finished, I could shrink it down to whatever size I needed it to be when I was done. So here's some examples of things that are relative in size just purely by how big I wanted them to be. And over here, about the time I was playing with blocks, the movie Blade Runner 2049 came out, and I was infatuated with the memory orb, that device that they use to create memories in androids. And I so desperately wanted one in real life uh, that I just decided I would build one in blocks. So, although it was kind of a collection of my grandfather's miscellaneous uh, camera lenses, it just fired my imagination. I just had to have something. So here's some more objects. And then in this room over here, I started also playing with color and light. Because of the limited color palette, how do you create variety and how do you create a sense of place and activity, but with only so many colors? And then eventually I wanted to see whether or not it was possible to create a sense of light even with these limited colors. So in this particular case, I've got a fireplace and I'm suggesting that light's coming from the fireplace and shining into the room. Same thing over here with this backpack and the flashlight. All of this is just part of the geometry, and it's uh, also that limited color palette. Same over here with this stove. I wanted to create a sense that an activity was happening. So there's cookies being baked inside, and then there's sort of a sense of a shininess or light on the edge of this. And purely that's just graphically done by which colors I applied to which various surface there was. And same thing here was, Thanksgiving dinner. Could I sort of capture the feel of Thanksgiving dinner, but with the limited color palette that I had and just low polys and a few objects? So and here's my cuckoo clock here in my studio. And then also playing with, natural organic things. Could I create sort of a slice of a riverbank and have it include uh, things that were underwater using just that one transparent color that they offer you. Over here, I was using Google Blocks, I still am, to do really, really quick 3D sketches. These are really valuable. Behind you can actually see my sketchbook drawing. But by being able to map out these things very quickly in VR, I not only was figuring out the scale and the complexity of the various objects, I now also had all the props necessary to build a scene. So I could very quickly just arrange all those items into an environment. So whether or not that environment was ultimately going to be a physical set or it was going to remain a virtual one, I had all the pieces necessary and I could arrange them so that I could create a sense of place and really figure out what would be necessary if we were to build this as a physical thing. Over here, a lot of times I would just go into uh, Google Blocks just to play around and mess around. So some of these items I didn't even know what I was going to be sculpting until I jumped in there, or I had done some goofy sketch and then decided I wanted to see what that might look like dimensionally. I played a little bit around with environments so that, what would a space look like if you could climb inside of it, and what were the props necessary to create that space, or details like this is the the torch that sits out in front of the Fortnum and Mason's department store in London. And then finally over here is an area where I was playing with cause and effect, whether or not I could create vignetted scenes that suggested that something had happened. So over here, you've got these roller skates that this poor, unfortunate sort of Tom Sawyer person was painting the fence and then hit a roller skate and then made a mess of the rest of the job. Or over here, I've got what I call the cannon cleaner, and so he or she has had a misfortune trying to clean the cannon. Or here you've got William Tell's tree, where I guess that he successfully shot the apple and not his son, and they're off having lunch to celebrate. So this was just a way for me to experience the pieces that I had created within Google Blocks. And Poly was really nice, but it was somewhat removed in that you could look at the objects and you could spin them around. But this is a way for me to share what it was like to actually be in the presence of these objects. And I really want to thank the team I know who have mostly been disbanded, who worked at Google VR team for really setting the stage for future creation tools that we'll be seeing in VR. I know that Blocks was very simplistic. It was kind of the crayon of art supplies when it came to VR construction. But I think in doing so, that a tremendous amount of thought and cleverness went into why the limitations were there. And I just want to thank everybody who produced this wonderful product. And I hope that we will all be able to share the works that we produce together in virtual reality. And thanks a lot for coming on this tour. And I look forward to a bright future of VR asset creation. Thanks a lot.